All right, we are back for another update and forecast on the California wildfires. In this video, we're going to go over all the most recent updates based on acreage burned, structures destroyed for the various wildfires going on in Northern California, including the Dixie Fire, the Mcfarland Fire, the Monument Fire, the River Complex, and the Antelope Fire. And then we're also going to look at the fire weather forecast because there's some challenging conditions moving in throughout the day today. We have very hot, dry weather expected with some temperatures in the mid 90s, relative humidity in the low teens to single digits, and then also the potential for more thunderstorms this afternoon. And I think that's actually the big question mark moving forward because we saw what those thunderstorms did yesterday, where our predominant winds throughout the day were just about 10 to 15 miles per hour, and then when those thunderstorms came through, it brought some gusts up to 35 miles per hour, and then that's when we started seeing much more active conditions. It really started to flare the fire up. Now, one thing I will say is that I plan on this live stream being much more interactive, so I'll hopefully be able to answer any questions you may have in the chat. If you want me to look at certain cities or places that may be in danger, we could look it up together, see what kind of conditions are going on in the places you guys are most interested in. And then if you go to my channel, there's a much more concise update and forecast on the Dixie Fire where I just tried to put everything that you need to know into about a 12-minute video based on all the updates and the forecast that we need to keep an eye on for this afternoon. But for right now, it's just go over some of the new information that's been coming out. And I think a good place to start is always the satellite imagery. And it certainly looks different than yesterday. You can see there's a large amount of smoke over Northern California. That's because we did have a large amount of activity last night. Like I said, as those thunderstorms came through, certainly flared things up on the Dixie Fire. We had large pyrocumulus clouds and even some lightning strikes as well. So I see we got our first question in here. When it says fire complex, does that mean there's more than one wildfire burning in a specific area? So that is a great question. We can actually go to the hotspot map here and answer that. So when it says river complex, I believe the river complex is that fire right there combined with that fire and the one all the way up to the northwest here. So when they say complex, it's usually multiple fires that are all burning in a fairly close region. And then what often happens with those complex fires is they eventually just grow into one another. So these two fires will most likely combine at some point, as you can see those hotspots getting close to each other. And if we look at the list of the top 20 largest wildfires in the history of California, a lot of the largest ones are complex fires. You can see number one largest wildfire of all time was the August complex, where multiple fires all grew together to grow to over 1 million acres combined. And then we had the Mendocino complex, the SCU lightning complex, and the LNU lightning complex, and the North complex as well. So out of the, top 7 largest wildfires in the history of California, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them are complex wildfires. So that's a great question there. And that also reminds me that the Dixie Fire, that is the fire we're going to be spending the most time on throughout this live stream, is now the single largest single fire in California history. So by single fire, again, that means it's not multiple fires all growing into each other. It's just one, and you can see that that is now over 500,000 acres. Don't believe that one's been updated yet, but most recent number I could find for the Dixie Fire said that it is up to 518,000 acres. So what we were saying, though, is based on that satellite imagery, few key things that I notice here is there's more smoke than we were seeing yesterday, especially on the northwestern parts of the state. But around the Dixie Fire, you can actually see a lot of that smoke is starting to clear out. Now, that's going to be important for a number of different reasons. Big thing that makes me think about is the fact that over the last few days, we've had so much smoke that it's actually been creating a somewhat protective barrier over the Dixie Fire, where the forecast would say it was going to be 95 degrees, and then we had so much smoke over the fire that when we actually looked at the observation stations, it would just be about 75 to 80 degrees because none of that sunlight could find its way through. So I would say it's actually a little bit concerning that we don't see as much smoke over the Dixie Fire. Now that's completely counterintuitive because you'd normally think of smoke as a bad thing, but throughout the morning and early afternoon hours, all that smoke that we have had recently has been actually helping to keep the fire calmer than if it was just clear skies. So slightly worrisome that we're transitioning to clearer skies right now. And then, like I've been saying, and like I talked a lot about in that concise video that I just posted to my channel, the big question mark going forward for the Dixie Fire today is that thunderstorm activity coming through. As of right now, it's looking like there's a larger chance for thunderstorms than there was yesterday. And we had some large thunderstorms over the Dixie Fire yesterday that brought some wind gusts up to 35 miles per hour, really flared up some of our fire activity, and also led to 10 lightning strikes. I'll have to double check to see if any of those lightning strikes actually started new fires. But if we want to see where it flared up on the Dixie Fire, most of that activity was on the northern section of the fire, which is a change from what we were seeing in previous days, because in previous days we were seeing most of our activity on that northeastern section, which is still creating some concerns for that fire going up to areas like Janesville as it's fueled by those southwesterly winds. But yesterday evening, once those thunderstorms came through, it's always a big question mark when it comes to thunderstorms, because it can either be good because of the increased cloud cover and some rainfall, or it can be bad because it brings some gusty erratic winds and some lightning. And we were looking at some of the live videos yesterday from the Dixie Fire area, and on a couple of the cameras you could see some rainfall coming in. On the East Quincy cam, you could actually see the droplets on the camera. So at first I was hoping that the impact of the thunderstorms on the Dixie Fire was going to be positive, but overall I would say it ended up having a negative impact as it brought some gusty erratic winds. Like I said, it also brought about 10 lightning strikes, but most of those were within the fire perimeter. So where the lightning struck, a lot of those fuels have been cleared out already or burnt out already. So I'll have to double check to see if any new fires started based on those lightning strikes. But the big story yesterday was that northern edge of the fire, where you can see lots of hot spots and heat activity on that northwestern section. And then the big concern yesterday was this area that it was almost extending fingers down from that northeastern part of that area, pushing to the north of Lake Almanor. So the big story yesterday was, as those thunderstorms came through, it flared things up again, and then you can see how close it came to some of these structures right around Lake Almanor. There was some worry that there could be some spotting into Chester yesterday, and then you could also see that finger stretching down, and that did cause some concern for the Westwood area. But the good news is that, at least from the reports I was seeing, overall there weren't any huge updates. It was certainly a large concern at the time, because we still had those gusty erratic winds and the thunderstorms, and we were seeing a lot of activity. But from the reports that I've been able to find this morning, it sounds like they were able to get a handle on it and keep it out of these important structure areas. Now, again, the other part of the Dixie Fire that's constantly flaring up is that northeastern section. And I think that's one of the key concerns. I'd say actually the key concern that I'm looking at over the next 24 hours is most likely this section again around Lake Almanor and Westwood, just because of the impacts we saw with those thunderstorms yesterday. It'll be worrisome if they make another southern push as those thunderstorms come in this afternoon. But then the other concern is that northeastern section, as the predominant wind direction is southwesterly in the afternoons, and you can't see the large amount of structures up to the northeast of this fire. Now, I do see one question just came in. Is the north arm of Indian Valley safe now that the fire has passed through? So we can go directly to Indian Valley. And we will zoom out. And I don't think that's where we intended to look. So, Don't exactly know where Indian Valley is. That's probably a key thing that I should know. You could also post in the live chat to update on exactly what part of the fire that would be in, because it seems like the search bar not working right now, and I still need to work on some of my geography. So what I was saying though is that northeastern section of the fire is causing some concern for the Janesville area, as we have mostly southwest winds in the afternoon, and we have seen a lot of activity on that arm of the fire. But the good news for areas like Susanville is the sheep fire, so northeast of Greenville. So right northeast of Greenville, so that's Greenville right there. So if you look at some of the hot spots down by Greenville, so if you look at the hot spots, you can see we did have some activity right there yesterday, some hotspot activity right there yesterday, and I want to see where the live hotspots are. Overall, it looks like a lot of the live hotspots are farther to the northeast. Now, that doesn't mean that those hotspots that we were seeing yesterday on the satellite perimeter, where you see those red dots, doesn't mean that those can't flare back up again. But it looks like as of right now, most of those hotspots are towards the northeast. So that will be an area I keep an eye on, because we do have a large amount of structures in that area. And I will also certainly purchase is on the east of Crescent Mills. All right, let's try Crescent Mills. Now I'm just very curious to find out where this is. Crescent Mills, right there. So, looks like we were... Oh, that's what was wrong. We have to turn the fire perimeter back on. Then let's search again. So it looks like the fire perimeter was very close to Crescent Mills yesterday. Thanks to everybody who's helping me with my geography in the live chat right now. That's why I do also like doing these more interactive videos, because I'm able to learn something, and hopefully at the same time I'm able to say things that help you guys learn something as well. We'll see if we get there in this video. So big thing that I would say is that it looks like there aren't many hotspots. You can see where the fire perimeter is, but it doesn't look like there are many hotspots directly around that area yesterday. You can see where those hotspots are up towards the northeast, and that will be an area that we certainly follow closely over the next couple of days. But our predominant wind direction is from the southwest, so that would act to almost push that fire back into itself instead of hopefully continuing to push it down. But if you look at the live imagery, looks like there's not any hotspots in that section right now, but we'll keep a close eye on it as we get later into the day. Now, one other thing that I want to do before I forget is, I know a lot of people have been asking about the Monument Fire, so I do want to go up to the Monument Fire real quick, because this is a fire that doesn't get as much attention as the Dixie Fire, because the Dixie Fire has over 1,000 structures destroyed, and it's the second largest wildfire in the history of California. But there are some pretty critical things going on the Monument Fire as well. You can see that is more in the northeastern parts of California. And if we look at the two cities, well, we have Del Loma and Big Bar within the Monument Fire. Now, the good news there is it looks like they were able to create some pockets where they were able to protect areas like Del Loma and Big Bar. Again, I haven't actually looked at any damage assessment maps, so I don't know how many structures may have been destroyed in those areas. But the big concern moving forward is that Burnt Ranch area and Junction City. Now, most of those hotspots appear to be more on the southeastern edge of the fire, but you do see them scattered throughout this entire fire perimeter. We might be able to see it better on this map. Yeah, I'd say that one looks a bit better, just being able to visually see where those hotspots are, and that is why I do have some concern for the Monument Fire. So you can see the hotspots on that left side of the fire near the Burnt Ranch area, and then also that large amount of fire activity down here, which is closer to the Junction City area. So again, where those orange dots are, that's where the structures are. So this is certainly a fire I'm following closely. It'd be interesting to see where the live hotspots are right now. looks like it has calmed down a lot this morning. If we look at the satellite imagery, big reason for that might just be because there's so much smoke over that fire. When you get a real thick smoke inversion, that acts to calm the fire behavior down. It keeps your temperatures lower, it keeps your winds calmer. So actually what we would hope for is that those winds stick around throughout the day and keep conditions calm, but given the last few days and given the large amount of instability that we have moving into the region, I would imagine that we're going to see a large amount of fire activity building back in, really on all of our various fires in Northern California, including the Dixie, Mcfarland, Monument. You can actually see one puff of smoke coming off of the river complex as of right now, which is surprising to see because usually we just have calmer conditions in the morning, but it does look like we're already starting to flare up a little bit. Now, again, looking at the satellite imagery, my main concern moving forward is the fact that a lot of that smoke has cleared out over the Dixie Fire, which is going to allow those warmer conditions to come in, and we're not going to have that shielding effect that we did have throughout the last few days in the morning and early afternoon hours. So just looking at the forecast for the Dixie Fire over the next 2 days, long story short, there's some challenging conditions coming in. You can see temperatures are expected to be in the mid-90s today and then getting even warmer tomorrow up into the high 90s. Relative humidity is going to be back into the teens, and then our predominant winds are actually going to be relatively weak because we have that large ridge and large high pressure system over the entire west. But when those thunderstorms come in the afternoon hours, as we saw yesterday, we can go back here so you can actually see those thunderstorms build in this afternoon. As those thunderstorms come in, we saw what happened on the fire yesterday. Our fire activity looked relatively calm, and then because the winds were only about 10 miles per hour, and then the thunderstorms came in, brought some gusts around 35 miles per hour, and our fire activity, and especially on that northeastern edge of the Dixie Fire, just flared up, and that was where the situation started to get scary for a little while there, as it was getting closer to those structures around Lake Almanor and the Westwood area as well. Just looking at those hotspots yesterday, you can see how it was making a southerly push, but unbelievable work done by our firefighters last night to keep those hotspots out of those areas. So amazing job by our firefighters. And if we want to actually see some of the resources that we have on the Dixie Fire, you can see we have 20 helicopters, 520 engines, 200 dozers, 173 water tenders, over 6,000 personnel, and 81 crews. So pretty awesome that we do have that many resources on this fire, because that could have been a very bad situation last night if we didn't have that many resources up there, because they were able to basically stop those hotspots in their tracks to protect both the areas around Lake Almanor and Westwood as well. Now, with that being said, that will continue to be one of the areas I'm following the closest over the afternoon hours today, because we saw what those thunderstorms did yesterday, and unfortunately it's expected to see more thunderstorms this afternoon. I think there is one sentence in the CAL FIRE report on InsuWeb that basically summed up my concern. So it's right here. For today, there is another chance for thunderstorms in and around the fire. The thunderstorm coverage is likely to be more widespread due to increased moisture. Any thunderstorms that develop will bring the potential for gusty outflow winds and dangerous cloud-to-ground lightning strikes. And then to top it off, we also have relative humidity dropping into the teens. So lots of concern on the Dixie Fire throughout the day today. We have temperatures up into the mid-90s, relative humidity dropping back into the teens. And then as that upper level moisture moves in, it brings the potential for more thunderstorms. And while the National Weather Service, you might have been wondering this question, they don't have any thunder expected throughout the day today, but both the incident meteorologist from CAL FIRE, who's positioned on the Dixie Fire, and the forecast models that we're looking at, we're both predicting thunderstorms in the Dixie Fire area today. So I would imagine that we are going to have some more thunderstorms, and that is going to be something we watch closely, because we saw the negative impact that had on the Dixie Fire yesterday. So I'll just remind you, yesterday when we looked at this map, almost all of northeastern California was covered in those thunderstorms, and you could see the large thunderstorm going directly over the Dixie Fire. We could also actually see it in some of the live cams as well, where there were some points where you could see some sprinkles, couple droplets on the live camera. So at first, we were hoping that it was going to have a positive impact on our fire, bringing some rain, but overall it ended up having a negative impact. We had those gusty winds leading to an increase in fire behavior and a very large pyrocumulus cloud yesterday. Certainly saw an increase in the fire activity around Dyer Mountain. And then we actually also had 10 lightning strikes that we were looking at last night. But I'll still have to stay updated to see if any of those lightning strikes actually turned into new fires. The one thing I will say about those lightning strikes that we got yesterday is when we were looking at where they were, most of them were within the Dixie Fire perimeter. So that's actually a good place to have the lightning strikes because a lot of the fuels have already been cleared out in that area. So there's less potential for it to continue to spread into some new fire that we would then have to attack. So I don't know if I ever actually said the numbers for the Monument Fire. You can see that there was a lot of growth since the last time they updated this. I believe the last time I looked at the Monument Fire, it was about 56,000 acres, and you can see it's up to about 75,000 acres as of right now. And then when it comes to our other fires, Mcfarland had a big pyrocumulus off of it yesterday. That one's up to 40,000 acres, but that one is up to 57% containment. So that one's looking a lot better there. River Complex, for whatever reason, we're already starting to see some activity, even though we're seeing much reduced activity throughout the rest of the northwestern area of California. That one is up to 37,000 acres and 10% containment. And then Antelope Fire, I'm actually interested to see this one because Antelope Fire was directly under those thunderstorms yesterday as well. That one's at 48,000 acres with 24% containment. I'm also interested to see if there was lots of hot spots on the Antelope Fire yesterday because, like I said, we had those thunderstorms coming in directly in that area. Yeah, it looked like the Antelope Fire flared up yesterday as well. Lots of growth to the southwest of that fire as those thunderstorms came in yesterday. I would say not a big surprise there, and it'd be interesting to see if that hotspot activity there was a spot fire from the Antelope Fire or if that was perhaps a new lightning fire start. That is something that happened up in this area on the thunderstorms that came in about 2 weeks ago. It was right around here. The Antelope Fire had such a large pyrocumulus cloud and it was almost combining with those thunderstorms that we did get a lightning start down here, but it looks like they were able to put that one out. Interested to know whether that one was a spot fire or if that was a lightning start that started a new fire. And see, I wonder if somebody's saying they'll send somebody a water bottle. Maybe they're saying to the person who says they need some rain badly. I'd say that is quite an understatement if we look at the drought map, but that did remind me that I need a nice sip of water as well. So, somebody just asked, think the fire will get to and possibly jump Highway 44. So, let's see if Highway 44 pops up on this if I search it. Yeah, again, one of the things that I need to work on over the next few weeks is my geography of California. You can almost never know too much about geography, but there's certainly a lot to learn. Yeah, so I notice somebody commented again. I don't think I'm going to figure out your question about Highway 44 at the moment, but when it comes to that rain, we did see some sprinkles on the Dixie Fire yesterday. Where's my thunderstorm map? Right about there. When the thunderstorms came through yesterday, we did actually see some sprinkles. We were looking at the East Quincy cam, and we saw a couple droplets on the camera. So we were hoping that there would be some rainfall, but overall, rain was pretty minimal. And although it looks like there's a large amount of moisture coming in as we funnel in that monsoonal moisture, most of that is in the upper atmosphere, not as much down north end, Highway 44 north end of Dixie Fire. So north end, if it's north end of Dixie Fire, that is where we had lots of activity yesterday. This map is, oh wow, that brought us all the way over to the East Coast. No wonder we couldn't find anything. So Highway 44 up on the north end of the Dixie Fire. Let's see if we can find, actually it might be easier to see on this map right here, where we have a large amount of hotspots on that northeast, on that northern edge. Again, the big reason for that, where those thunderstorms came in yesterday, that brought some 35-mile-per-hour winds and certainly flared up the activity on this northern edge. So we did finally find Highway 44. Now, one thing I'd say is the predominant wind direction during the afternoons is from the southwest, so that would make you think that these hotspots are going to turn back to the northeast, but most of our activity throughout the day yesterday was actually pushing this fire down to the south. So it's kind of the battle between the predominant winds and the thunderstorm winds. When those predominant winds are going in the afternoon, when it starts shifting back up towards the northeast, that would act to push those hotspots up towards Highway 44, although it doesn't look like we're in that much danger for it crossing Highway 44 at this point. But I think the bigger question is going to be, as those thunderstorms come in this afternoon, if we're going to get more of those 35-mile-per-hour wind gusts, because if we do, we're going to have to watch these hotspots very closely around the Lake Almanor area and just north of Westwood, because we saw the push that those were able to make yesterday. Now, again, somebody was mentioning the rain that we had yesterday, and what I was saying is that most of that moisture is up in the north, or the upper parts of the atmosphere. So while we did get some sprinkles down on the surface, we can actually look at the surface. Down on the surface, you're in the low to mid 90s, in some cases the high 90s and even triple digits, and then your humidity at the surface is still very dry, in the single digits to the low teens. So even if you do get some of that rain, a lot of it evaporates before it actually gets to the surface, which is certainly unfortunate. And your little weather vocab word for the day, that's called virga, where you get rain coming out of a thunderstorm, but it evaporates before it gets to the surface. So unfortunately, with those thunderstorms we had yesterday, it was kind of exactly what we didn't want to happen. We were hoping for lots of rain and minimal winds, and we got minimal rain and lots of winds. And hopefully that made sense. That was a bit wordy right there. But one thing I haven't shown yet that I know people are always interested in. If we look at the imagery right now, you can see a large amount of smoke over California, although certainly some of that smoke starting to moderate over the Dixie Fire. But I would be interested to see the smoke forecast today, because I haven't looked at it since earlier this morning when I showed the smoke forecast in my morning hit at KSBW. Again, I have another show coming up at 12, so unfortunately I won't be able to make this live stream too long today. But before I have to go, we'll try to cover all the most important information that we can. So one thing I noticed, I'm actually glad it started zoomed out, because you can see how that wildfire smoke is stretching all the way up through the Pacific Northwest. And unfortunately, much of the Pacific Northwest is under that high pressure as well. So that's bad when it comes to air quality, because that means your winds are going to be calmer and a lot of that smoke is able to just settle down to the surface. Now, one other thing I want to do, now that we see how much smoke is throughout the entire Pacific Northwest, I want to see, you can see large amount of smoke over Washington and Oregon as well. I'd be interested to know if that's all just from the smoke coming up from California, or if that's actually from some of the fires going on in Oregon and Washington as well. Seems like they've had a bad fire season, just like California has. And like I said, they have a lot of excessive heat over them as of right now. So that does create the opportunity for more fires for Oregon and Washington moving forward. But back to California, you can see, I would say that actually usually this smoke forecast and air quality map isn't usually right spot on, but I would say it's perfectly spot on right now. If we look at the smoke going back to California, you can see most of that smoke is in the northwestern parts of the state, starting to clear over the Dixie Fire. And over that northwestern part of the state, you can see that's where we have the very unhealthy to hazardous air quality. And then over the Dixie Fire, it's just in that unhealthy for sensitive groups and unhealthy range. And then if we actually want to see how that air quality is going to change throughout the day today, and this is actually also one of the good things to see what direction your fire is going to spread in as well, because whichever way the smoke is moving is most likely whichever way the fire is going to move as well. So it looks like directly over the Dixie Fire, it's moving mostly up towards the northeast, which makes sense because we get those southwesterly winds in the afternoon. Looks like the Bay Area starts out with some smoke, but as those onshore winds pick up in the afternoon, it's able to push some of that smoke out, but lots of smoke remaining over Northern California, so should be another day of some pretty poor air quality. So just in case you're just coming into the live chat, let's check out the hotspot map again and talk about the key areas of concern. And then if anybody posts any questions in the live chat, I can try to answer your questions, as the plan for this video is to be a bit more interactive than the concise forecast that I posted for the Dixie Fire that you can find on my channel, where I just spent about 12 minutes saying everything you need to know about the Dixie Fire over what happened in the last 24 hours and what's expected to happen over the next 24 hours. But looking at the Dixie Fire, I would say there's three key areas of concern. I would say the number one area of concern right now is probably this area around Lake Almanor. You can see how close those hotspots were able to get last night. That was the area of the fire that was really started to flare up when we had those thunderstorms coming through. And I see somebody said, was Westwood evacuated? I would imagine so. I'd actually be surprised if they didn't already have evacuation warnings. It looks like there's large amounts of evacuation warnings relatively in that area. But again, I put all the links in the description for all the evacuation warnings, because I usually don't try to cover those myself, because I feel like that opens the door for some confusion, and it is always better to get that kind of information straight from your local source. But moving forward, I'd say there's the top three areas for concern. I'd say number one is this area around Lake Almanor. We saw that southern push it made yesterday when those thunderstorms came through, and we had some gusts up to 35 miles per hour. Luckily, CAL FIRE was able to do an amazing job on this area, keeping it out of those structures that you can see right there. You can see how close it did get, though, where we have those VIIRS hotspot detections, and then where those structures are in Lake Almanor. Now, one thing I actually did remember about the evacuations and various things like that, I believe they were actually planning on repopulating some of the areas like Chester and maybe some of the other areas around Lake Almanor. But I did see one post this morning that they canceled those plans to repopulate because of that increase in activity that we had with those thunderstorms yesterday. So, Holt, where did those hotspots on Lassen Volcano come from? So, I'd imagine that's Lassen Volcano right there. I don't actually know. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like it. I would imagine that is, because that's Lassen Volcanic National Park right there, and it certainly kind of looks like a volcano. So those hotspots right there, I would be interested to know if that was from spot fires from all of this. So the thunderstorms really flared up that northwestern section of the fire. You can see how much heat was being generated there. Yesterday we had a huge pyrocumulus cloud coming off of it, and then you can see there's this little fire that's disconnected from the major blaze. I would be interested to know if that was because of spot fires, where you have your major blaze here and then the winds are able to pick up some burning embers, drop it down here. That's been one of the biggest problems on the Dixie Fire throughout the entire lifetime of this fire, because the fuels are so dry right now that when those burning embers drop down into those dry fuels, there's about a 90 to 100% chance of ignition. So, but I don't actually know if that one was a spot fire or if it was perhaps a lightning start, because we did have some lightning that we were looking at last night, at least 10 strikes based on those thunderstorms that were coming through. But I'm going to ignore the live chat for 1 second here as I go over the top 3 areas of concern for the Dixie Fire. I'd say my number 1 area of concern are these structures around Lake Almanor. You can see how close those hotspots came yesterday, and that was all flared up by those thunderstorms that came through, and unfortunately we have more thunderstorms coming through this afternoon if we want to actually see that. So it's not just me making that up. If we go into about 2 p.m., we're expecting to see more thunderstorms, then into 5 p.m. as well. And the report from the incident meteorologist said that for today there is another chance for thunderstorms in and around the fire. The thunderstorm coverage is likely to be more widespread due to increased moisture. So that's why that's my top concern yesterday. We saw that get flared up by the thunderstorms yesterday and made that southern push. And we have more thunderstorms coming in today. So that's definitely the area I'm going to be watching the closest. But I'm also going to be watching this area north of Westwood very close as well, because you can see the southern push that made as well as those thunderstorms came in with those 35 mile per hour wind gusts. Now, the good news is if we look at the satellite imagery right now, you can see Dixie Fire overall looking much, much calmer than it was yesterday. And if we look at the hot spots on this map, you can see there are a couple of those bright red areas popping up, but certainly looking calmer than it was yesterday. And if we look at the live hotspots popping up, we do still have those areas to the north of Lake Almanor and to the north of Westwood, but I've been watching these hotspots all morning, and it seems like every single time I look at this map, the hotspot area is reduced. So what I'm hoping is that CAL FIRE is able to get in here, really make some progress, do some more structure protection, get some lines in, and make sure that the northern areas of both of Lake Almanor area and Westwood are protected just in case those hotspots flare up once again this afternoon. So number 1 priority I'd say is those structures to the north of Lake Almanor. Number 2 priority is the Westwood area. That was where there was a large amount of concern yesterday, but based on the CAL FIRE reports I was able to find this morning, sounds like they made some great progress and protection in both of those areas. And then I would say the number 3 priority on the Dixie Fire, this one is a little more extended in the forecast. Those will most likely be a large concern later this afternoon. The concern as we get in, somebody says zoom out. I can do that for a second. So those are my 2 main concerns this afternoon because of how close they are to those structures and the fact that we have more of the same factor that allowed those parts of the fire to flare up, being the thunderstorms. And then my number 3 concern is this northeastern section of the fire. Now, as of right now, it's looking relatively calm right there, about the calmest that we've seen it in a number of days. But most of the time when we look at that northeastern section in the afternoon hours and into the evening, we have large pyrocumulus clouds coming up, lots of fire activity, and usually is just glowing bright red right there. So reason that's my number 3 main concern on the Dixie Fire is because our predominant winds in the afternoon hours are from the southwest. So that tries to just continue to push that fire farther to the northeast. Now, this is something that I've talked a lot about because we have all those cities up to the northeast right there. If we want to look at them, it should be Susanville, Johnstonville, Janesville, and Buntingville. And I would say Susanville and Johnstonville, again, never take my word for it. Always trust your local resources and CAL FIRE more than what I say. But I would say Susanville and Johnstonville are actually looking like they're in a pretty good position because they have the sheep fire burn scar from 2020, and we can already see how that's been moderating the fire activity from the Dixie Fire. It's almost like a puzzle piece. Right when the Dixie Fire got to that sheep fire burn scar, it basically stopped in its tracks. 2 main reasons for that. The sheep fire burned out a lot of the fuels in this area, so there's just less fuel to continue that fire spread. And then 2, they're able to reuse some of those containment lines that they were able to use on the sheep fire. So the reason I believe that's good news for areas like Susanville and Johnstonville is they have that entire sheep fire between them and the Dixie Fire, and we've already seen the great protective barrier that that burn scar has been providing so far. Now, the reason my big concern is Janesville and Buntingville is because those areas don't have that boundary where the sheep fire is, and you can see it's basically just fuel between where we're seeing those hotspots and where the large amount of structures are there. So if we want to see how much those hotspots moved in the last 24 hours, that's where the hotspots were yesterday. Let's see where the hotspots are right now. Looks like they've extended up to right about there, so certainly still moving towards the northeast. I would say less than in previous days. If we measure that, looks like it's grown about 2.5 miles over the last 24 hours. And again, it is still a concern for areas like Janesville. We'll have to keep a very close eye on if there's any new evacuation orders in that area. But as of right now, it looks like those hotspots are about 6 miles away from Janesville and Buntingville up to the northeast there. And again, with those southwesterly winds, it'll continue to try to push that fire to the northeast. Now, one thing I will say though is I've been talking about this for about 3 days now, which means CAL FIRE probably saw this coming more than a week ago. So they've been putting a lot of resources on this side of the fire, making sure they're getting some containment lines, some contingency lines, then some structure protection as well. So it's not like this is just going to move up there and everyone's going to be surprised. I know they already have been doing a large amount of work on this area of the fire. So one thing that we haven't looked at in a while is the fire weather forecast. So I see somebody just posted something in the live chat. Looking at the fire activity, it looks like the fire might flank north of the sheep fire area looking for fuel. Oh, that's actually a great point that I forgot to mention. If you look at where those hotspots are, you can see that half of it is to the north of the sheep fire. The other half is to the east of the sheep fire. And if we turn on the perimeter again, you can see that perfect little puzzle piece around the sheep fire burn scar where it stopped directly where that burn scar is, but then half of it pushed up to the north and the other half has continued to move around to the east. So, oh, I see Catherine Davidson posted something in here. I'd love to see what she has to say. Hi guys, getting computer spiff spoff. I study this guy and I'm eager to learn about the weather. I would say unbelievable job, Catherine, last night. I saw you were live for an incredibly long time. So the sheer volume of work that you've been putting out is just unbelievable. And I couldn't believe how long you were able to do that live stream last time. I usually lose my voice about 2.5 hours in, so I'll have to learn your trick there. So if you are still watching, I'll mention what my top 3 areas of concern are throughout the day today. My number 1 and 2 are this area right around the north shore of Lake Almanor where we have those structures and where we had all those hotspots coming in last night. Number 2 priority for me is that Westwood area where, again, we had those hotspots because when those thunderstorms came in, they brought those 35-mile-per-hour winds. And the reason that's such a concern for me throughout the day today is because we have that thunderstorm activity once again coming in. If we look into this afternoon, based on this map, it looks like there's less thunderstorms than yesterday, but if we look at the actual CAL FIRE forecast, they say that for today, there is another chance for thunderstorms in and around the fire. The thunderstorm coverage is likely to be more widespread due to increased moisture. And any thunderstorms that develop will bring the potential for gusty outflow winds and dangerous cloud-to-ground lightning strikes. So that would create some cause for concern as we saw the impacts that those thunderstorms had on those 2 hotspots yesterday, and unfortunately we have more thunderstorms coming in throughout the day today. Now the other big update when it comes to that thunderstorm story is we're now also predicting some thunderstorms for Saturday afternoon as well. I believe this is a change in the forecast, but as that moisture comes in, we could take another look at it. Moisture coming in Friday And then also sticking around throughout some periods of Saturday, you can see that we have that 10 to 20% chance of thunderstorms during Saturday afternoon into Saturday night as well. And then what I was saying is my number 3 concern is that northeastern section of the Dixie Fire where we've had that large flare up, and our predominant wind direction is going to be from the south winds. Again, winds are tricky on the Dixie Fire right now because we have that large high pressure system over us, which usually with a high pressure system that moderates the winds. They're just around 10 to 15 miles per hour, and that was something that we saw for the most part on the Dixie Fire yesterday. But then if you actually looked at some of the observations when those thunderstorms came through yesterday, right as those thunderstorms came over the fire, that's where we transitioned to some 35 mile per hour wind gusts, and that is again what we're expecting to see today. But predominant winds will be from the southwest again today, and that will act to continue to try to push this northeastern hotspot farther up to the northeast. Main reason that's concerned is because you can see all those structures up there. The good news is we still have quite a ways to go. We can measure it one more time. You can see based on yesterday, we were about 8 miles away, and then if we look at the current hotspot, you can see that it has moved to the northeast, so that is some proof for how those southwesterly winds do push that fire farther to the northeast. Those hotspots to those structures right now look to be about 6.5 miles away. So looks like we still have some time there. And I know CAL FIRE has been putting a lot of resources on this edge of the fire, but that will be something that we have to keep an eye on going forward. Now, one thing that I haven't pulled up yet, but I know is always sometimes people's favorite thing to look at in these videos, is the San Jose State Wharf S Fire Wildfire Simulation Model. So as this loads, I'll load up this morning's forecast model run. As this loads, I'll just remind you what this is. Basically, this is the #1 wildfire simulation model in the world. Might be a little biased there because I currently am a graduate student at San Jose State. But what this model does is it combines where that fire perimeter is with where the active hotspots are, with the fuel, weather, and topography. And then it also, the thing that makes this model stand out compared to the rest is it also takes into account how the wildfire creates its own weather, which is one of the big impacts that we have seen on the wildfire throughout the course of its lifetime. We've seen when we get some of those large pyrocumulus clouds, then we get all those winds rushing in from all kinds of directions, and that's where we've seen a lot of that large activity on the Dixie Fire. When I looked at this model yesterday, it was predicting those thunderstorms coming through and having those arms to the north of Lake Almanor and to the north of Westwood flaring up. So that was some proof of how good this model can be in predicting wildfire growth. Now, one thing I will say before I press play is this is an experimental forecast only. It doesn't take into account firefighting strategies and operations. So there are some times when I click through this and you just see massive growth of the fire. That's saying what would happen to the fire if there weren't any firefighters. But luckily we do have firefighters. So you can see how it predicted that growth on the northern edges of the fire. And it looks like as we get into this afternoon, you can see those winds shift. Just in case you missed it, I want to replay that. So during the early morning hours, you can see the winds mostly down canyon, and then you can see the clock right down here. Right when it gets to 12 o'clock, you notice those winds shift back up canyon. So once that happens, that's where we'll likely see more growth on the northeastern section of this fire. And then the big question mark moving forward will be if we get some more of that thunderstorm activity and what it will do to these areas to the north of Westwood and to the north of a lot of those structures around Lake Almanor as well. One thing I just noticed as we're looking at this is especially in those areas where we had the most thunderstorm activity yesterday, you can see very gusty, erratic winds throughout the day today as well, just in case you missed that. So this is showing this afternoon thunderstorms coming in about 1 to 2 o'clock, and it actually shows some of that erratic winds right there in the model. And when that comes through, you can see that's some of the times where it has the largest amount of fire spread as well. So hopefully that was helpful to be able to look at. Looks like the key areas where it's expecting more fire spread were actually the exact same 3 areas that I was saying that were the highest priorities on this fire throughout the day today, both to the north of Lake Almanor, to the north of Westwood, and to the northeastern section of the fire, where those southwesterly winds should act to continue to push that fire farther to the northeast. But overall, always great to look at this model because it does show how much of an impact weather has on the fire. So just looking at the overall fire weather forecast, this is basically the system that's driving the overall conditions. We have this large ridge over the west, which is creating some excessive heat warnings in areas of Washington, but also some warm temperatures for California. With those warm conditions, we are also seeing very dry conditions on the surface, so relative humidity in the single digits to low teens. But then the big question mark in the forecast is as that moisture comes in this afternoon and the impact that will have on creating more thunderstorms. I think that is the big story throughout this afternoon because we saw the impact those thunderstorms had on the Dixie Fire yesterday. Certainly crossing my fingers, hoping that this time around it'll just bring rain and no gusty erratic winds, but looking at that Wharf S-Fire model, it does look like it's predicting more of those gusty erratic winds and more fire growth where we saw it yesterday, so we certainly will have to keep an eye on that thunderstorm activity. So it looks like they're seeing the first little bits coming in relatively soon here and then picking up as we get to about 2 to 5 p.m. this afternoon. And then one big change is that we're also seeing the potential for some thunderstorms Saturday afternoon. You can actually see that better on this image right here, where you can see that 10 to 20% chance of thunderstorms tomorrow from about 11 a.m. till 10 p.m. And even though they don't show thunderstorms today, when we're looking at the CAL FIRE report, they were saying that the thunderstorm coverage is likely to be more widespread due to increased moisture. Now, I think the thunderstorms are the big story when it comes to the fire weather forecast, but even if those thunderstorms don't come in, we still have some very tricky conditions to deal with where we have temperatures in the mid 90s today, temperatures in the high 90s tomorrow, and then relative humidity dropping back into the teens. So I never like to give the bad news, but we have some very critical fire weather conditions coming over the next 2 days. So we're going to have to keep a very close eye on the Dixie Fire moving forward. Now, one thing that I will say is that when it comes to the Dixie Fire, we did have a lot of activity yesterday, and overall, I would say that the conditions look more challenging throughout the day today. So we're certainly going to have to keep a very close eye on it, but I do have a 12 o'clock show coming up at KSBW, and I have to make sure all my graphics are in order before we go live. So I'm going to wrap up this live stream here. Sorry I didn't get to all of your guys' questions in the live chat, but I hope this video was helpful. If you missed anything that I've said throughout this live stream, you can go to my channel where I did a much more concise update and forecast on the Dixie Fire, where I basically put all the most important information into a 12-minute format that you'll be able to check out. So hopefully this video was helpful, and I don't know if I'll be able to do another update this afternoon, but I certainly will try to. I'm trying to wrap up my master's thesis right now, so lots of balls juggling in the air, working at KSBW, doing these live streams, and trying to wrap up my thesis. But given the challenging conditions we have coming in, I certainly will try to do an update at some point, especially when those thunderstorms are coming in, to see how that's impacting the fire. So I hope this video was helpful, and thanks for watching.